Hello, I trust that you're all doing well. And during our last lecture, we started with language development. We talked about what language is. We said that language is an arbitrary system that we use to communicate, and it contains what symbols. It contains rules that governs how these symbols are combined. And language can neither be spoken, written, or signed. We also look at the components of language, where we talked about phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics, and what these mean. In today's lecture, we are going to talk about the milestones or the stages of language development. Now, all children are able to develop language. Every child has the capacity, unless the child has what severe deficits of what any neurological condition or condition with the brain. Now, there are 4 stages through which children develop language, and these are the pre-linguistic stage or the pre-verbal stage. We have the single word or the holophrastic stage. We have the multi-word or the telegraphic period. And then we have the emerging grammars or the role acquisition stage. In fact, all these stages have periods in which they occur. So let's start with pre-verbal or pre-linguistic stage. And this happens from 0 to 12 months. Now, when a child is born, the child starts with what's communicative utterances, and these are not verbal. So we call these what the earliest sounds or the earliest vocalizations. These are the signs that the child used to communicate. Because at 6 months, the child cannot tell you that I'm feeling pain at this side of my body, or I am tired, or I am weak, or I am feeling cold. So they use this earliest vocalization to communicate. Some of these include crying, some of these include laughter, some of these include smiles, some are also whimpers, gestures, grunts, burps, and what? Imitations. So they are gestures that children use to communicate. For instance, when you are feeding an 8-month-old child and the child is what satisfied, what do? Anytime you bring the food closer to their mouth, they turn their neck sideways, and this shows or tells you that what the child is satisfied. If you are breastfeeding, the child refuses what to take the breast milk, and they push their mouth or their face sideways, and this shows that what they are having satiation. So I say that what children use these early vocalizations, or what we call earliest sounds, to communicate discomfort. Either they are not comfortable with something, to communicate satiation, or they are satisfied with something, or positive emotion or negative emotion. And these things are what we call pre-linguistic communication: the crying, the gestures, the imitation, the laughing, the smiling, the burps, the whimpers, the grunts, etc. These are what we are calling pre-linguistic communication. Even from the word pre-linguistic or pre-verbal, you know that pre means before. So before the child learns to verbalize whatever it is they want to say, before the child acquires language, that is pre-linguistic. So after learning to use early vocalizations to communicate, when it is about 3 to 5 weeks, the child begins to coo. So we have cooing, C-O-O-I-N-G, where the child makes what? Vowel-like sounds, repeated vowel-like sounds, like ah, like oo, like e, and cocoa, etc. Now, after the child is done with cooing, the child begins to what? Babble. We call it babbling. Now, this happens around 6 to 7 months. Now, the child begins to repeat what? Single syllables. The child begins to repeat single syllables. So they will say ma, 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 ba, 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 da, 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 etc. In fact, because what they are saying doesn't make sense and the way it sounds, that is why it is called what? Babbling. Now, the timing of babbling is determined by how ready the child is biologically, and it's not because the child has learned how to hear. The child, since it was born, hears, but just that they cannot what? Communicate. So at that point, they are biologically ready to produce what? The babbling. So they are communicating, and whatever they are even saying doesn't make sense. It's as if they are talking what? Gibberish. Now, babbling allows children to exercise their vocal cords, and it helps them to develop articulation skills. So it's just a way of what? Exercising their vocal cords or exercising their voice or their articulation skills before they start to speak. And babies at every culture or in every country, they babble almost about what? The same age, and they produce similar range of sounds. So whether the child is in Asia, whether the child is in America, whether the child is in UK, whether the child is in Africa, the content of their babbling is what? Is similar. So you hear mama, da da da, etc. So at this stage, parents should know that the mama or the da 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 they make is not because they are calling their names. They are just what? Babbling. They are just preparing their vocal cords for speech. Now we move to the holophrastic stage or the single word stage. At this stage, what happens is that the child uses a single word consistently and intentionally to refer to objects, people, and places. So here the child has learned how to pick up what? Some single words from their environment. And usually these words are what? Names of people closest to them, their parents. So now they can say mama. And in this case, the mama refers to their mother, or dada, and the dada in this case refers to their mother. So we say a hollow phrase is a one-word utterance that represents the entire statement a child wants to make. The entire phrase a child wants to make is what we refer to as a hollow phrase. So instead of the child to say, I want cocoa, the child will say cocoa. Or if the child wants food, instead of the child to say, I'm hungry and I want food, the child will say food. If the child wants you to give them their toy, they will say what? Toy. If the child wants them to give them their book, they will say just book. So they are using that single word to make or to represent an entire sentence or a phrase. Now, as I said, the names that or the vocabulary that they acquire at this stage is what includes names of important people, so their mother or their father, familiar animals or pets. So they can call a cuckoo to refer to what chicken, they can refer to cats, dogs, any pet that is kept at home, because it is closer to the child and it is important to the child learns how to what? Pronounce it. Sometimes they might use cocoa for food and so for water, etc. Now by the end of this stage, the child has what? At least 80 word vocabulary. The child has 80 word vocabulary. Let's move to the next stage, which is what? Still the holophrastic stage. Now, there are sometimes that there is a gap, there's a discrepancy between what the child can what understand and what they can express. Because their language is limited, sometimes when you say something, they understand, but they are not able to express themselves similarly. And this is what we call an expressive lag, the gap between what the child can understand and what they can express themselves. So if you send the child, go and take my phone for me, they go and bring it. Kofi, go and sit down on the chair, they sit down. Kofi, bring me that book, they'll bring it to you. They perfectly understand what you are saying, but they can't express themselves, or they don't have that enough vocabulary to express themselves. And so the gap between what they can understand and what they can express is what we call the expressive lag. So there are certain times that the child actually understands whatever is said. Sometimes the child also is able to speak, usually through imitation. So you just say something, you hear that the child has repeated the same thing, but the child does not really understand the import of what they are saying. And that is what we call the receptive lag. So not all spoken words at this stage are clearly understood by the child. This means that there is equally a gap between what the child can speak and what they understand. That is what we call the receptive lag. So it's either the child can understand something but cannot express it, that is expressive lag, or they express it but they don't really understand the statements they are making, and that is what a receptive lag. Now, because the children's vocabulary begin to grow, every week they learn as much as what, about 20 words. Now, they make errors in their attempt to what, to make speech. Example of these errors are overextensions and what, underextension. So overextension is when the child uses one word to describe a wider set of objects. So if the family cat is called Quinzel, every cat is Quinzel. Or if the family dog is called Brownie, they refer to every dog as what? Brownie. Now, in under extension, the child what, applies a word to only one object. So, for example, if their family cat is called Quinzel, every their cat is what, a cat, or only their cat is what, a Quinzel. They don't refer to any other cat as a cat. That is what we mean by under extension, the application of a word to only one object. So for instance, a cat may be used to name only their family cat and no other type of cat. So no other cat is called cat except the one in their house. We move to the multi-word or the telegraphic stage. Now, because children are continuously every week acquiring vocabulary, they begin to merge these single words, these single or holophrases into 2-word and 3-word sentences. And these are what we call what? Telegraphic speech. So they link 2 words together. The 2-word sentences are what we call telegraphic speech. Now, the sentences consist of what? Only the context of words. It does not include prepositions, conjunctions, verbs, etc. In fact, the sentences lack grammar. For example, if they want to say, "Mommy, buy me an ice cream," they will say, "Mommy, ice cream." For example, if they want to say, "Mommy, give me the doll," they will just say, "Give doll." If they say, "Mommy, walk with me," or "Let's walk to church," they will say, "Mama, walk." If they say, "Mommy, I want you to dance with me," they will say, "Mama, dance." So here they are just combining what, 2 words to form sentences. Now, by the end of this stage, the child has a core vocabulary. That is the number of words that the child has. The child has about what? 300 to 200, 200 to what? 300 words. Now, at this stage, there's an increase in what? At the emerging grammar stage, the child now begins to acquire grammar. So they now know that, no, I have to add the rules. So they begin to what? Organize the sentence in the right order, in the right length, and they make sure that the sentence is grammatically correct. At this stage, they begin to learn the plural of words. For example, book is books, dog is dogs, cat is cats, table is tables, chair is chairs. But in their ability to learn the rules of language or grammar, they make mistakes. One of the mistakes they make is what? Over-regularization, where they extend or they generalize grammatical rules to irregular ones. So in English, commonly, if you want to form the plural of a word, you say what? You add s or es to form the plural. So, but there are some situations that this rule does not apply. For example, the plural of man is men, but you can see children say, "Oh, men's," or man's. So, for instance, instead of the child to say, "I ate fried rice," you say, "I eated fried rice." Instead of the child to say, "My mother bought me a dress," you say, "My mother bought me a dress." Instead of the child to say, I sang at church, or she sang at church. They say she sings at church. Now, research shows that this overgeneralization is not okay only in English language. Even the local languages, they do it. So at the end of the emerging grammar or the rule acquisition stage, the children have about what? 900 to 1,000 words, which they use what? Daily. Now, it is important for us to know that children vary in their rate of language development. What does this mean? It means that although we have normative periods, every child has their own rate at which they develop. I remember when we were learning about the principles of development, we said that development varies from person to person. And what this means is that everybody is unique. So even if we say that at the pre-linguistic stage is between what? 0 to 12 months. One child can start blabbing at 6 months, another can start at 7 months, another can start at 8 months, another can start at 9 months or 10 months. And so once the child is in the normative period, we should know that what the rate at which each child will develop language varies. So therefore, we cannot just base on chronological age to say whether the child has developed language or not. Let the child pass through the normative period. So we know that pre-linguistics ability, you're supposed to master them by age 1. So allow the period to pass. If after 1 year or even 1 year, 6 months, the child does not even have pre-linguistic ability to even talk about holophrasis, then you know that there's a challenge. So you don't use the chronological age, because somebody will start holophrasis at what? 13 months, another person will start at 14 months. So psychologists use what we call the mean length of utterances in a morpheme. That is the average length of a morpheme in an utterance or in a sentence, to assess the index of language, how well the child has mastered the use of language. Now let's do theories. In everything we study in psychology, there are theories that underpin it. And so when it comes to language, there are theories. So we have the nativist theory, the behaviorist theory, and the interactionist theories. So we'll take each one of them and see what they talk about. So the nativists believe that a person is born with an innate ability to learn language. Noam Chomsky is one of the nativists, and he believes that everybody is born with something called a language acquisition device. Now, the language acquisition device, it is not a chip or any device or any object that is in the individual. The language acquisition device is a biologically innate ability or capacity for people to learn language. And this ability is independent of the language. So any language that is involved, there is a language acquisition device. And this language acquisition device helps a child to be exposed to adult speech. Once the child is exposed to adult speech, the child learns how to implement some of the general principles or rules in discovering the grammar that should be used to combine the words and the sentences to form meaning. So this is what his theory is about, that every child has an innate ability. Chomsky believes that regardless of one's country or one's culture in which language is to be learned, children reach certain developmental milestones almost at the point in time. So this is where I say that whether the child is in Asia, is in Afghanistan, is in Rome, is in Italy, is in UK, is in Ghana, is in Northern region, or is in Greater Accra, almost at the same point, they will develop language. They believe in what is called the critical period hypothesis. What this means is that there is a particular age at which language can be easily acquired. I remember when we were doing prenatal development, we talked about the critical periods of development. So like these theories too, they believe that preschool children acquire their first language very easily at a particular age or between a particular age period. And this age period is between age 2 to puberty or to adolescence. So adults who are grown can still learn a language, but the challenge here is that there will be challenges. It is not that easy like it is between 2 years to adolescence when one learns a particular language. And this is a critical period for language learning because language is a product of biological maturation. They feel that at that point, biologically, the child is matured to learn language, and the learning comes easy around this time. Therefore, the long and short is that nativists believe that language acquisition is innate, is inherent, and is biological. In fact, there are some theories who believe that the language acquisition device actually represents certain parts of the brain where language is localized. What this means is that the brain controls every activity that we engage in, whether it is eating, whether it is drinking, whether we want to feel hungry or thirsty, our ability to walk, our ability to plan and execute tasks, our ability to speak. Everything is guided or coordinated by the brain. And research shows that there are certain parts of the brain that are involved in the use of language, particularly in speaking and in understanding. So, for example, these two areas are what we call the Broca's area and the Wernicke's area. And these are located in the cerebral cortex. And the cerebral cortex is the outer part of the brain. Now, to explain this, I'll use this diagram. So when we say the brain is the whole of this diagram. Now, this area, the white area, is where we refer to as the brainstem. And the areas covered with color are what we are referring to as the cerebral cortex. And so this is the area where the Broca's area and the Wernicke's area is located. Now, the cerebral cortex is divided into 4 lobes or 4 sections, and these lobes also have their own function. So, for example, the blue area is where we call the frontal lobe. The yellow area is where we call the parietal lobe. The green area is where we call the temporal lobe, and the occipital lobe is the pink area. Each of these have their major function. So the Broca's area that we are talking about is located in the frontal lobe, and then the Wernicke's area is located in the temporal lobe. So if you have another diagram of the brain, you see that the temporal lobe is where it is painted blue, this area, and so it is in the frontal lobe. And the Wernicke's area is here, where it is painted green, and that area is the temporal lobe. So somebody will ask, what is the Broca's area for? What is it used for? The Broca's area has 3 functions. The first one is to regulate breathing patterns when you are speaking, because as you are speaking, you're also breathing in and out. It helps you to vocalize speech, and then it coordinates the organs that are used for speech. So whilst I am talking, I am using my larynx, my pharynx, my cheeks, my jaws, my teeth, my tongue, etc. And they are combining in the right way for the sounds to come out for you to hear. And so basically, we can say that the Broca's area helps you to speak or to express yourself in any language. And it involves a coordination of different things. Now, if a person's Broca's area is damaged, what happens is that the person cannot be able to express themselves well. And so sometimes they're able to make sounds, but the words do not come out clearly. In fact, sometimes the words cannot even be formed. And the Wernicke's area. The Wernicke's area is responsible for regulating our ability to understand language. So recognizing morphemes or phonemes and reading. That is what the Wernicke's area is for. So when there's a damage to the Wernicke's area, the person has a difficulty or an inability in comprehending meaningful language. In comprehending meaningful language. So we can say that the Broca's area is for expressive language, and the Wernicke's area is for receptive language. There are other nativists, and other nativists include Slobin. Slobin believes that children are born with what is called a language making capacity, and this idea is similar to that of Chomsky, who talked about a language acquisition device. So the LMC is a set of cognitive and perceptual abilities that are highly specialized for learning. So it is innate and the person is born for it. So basically, what the nativist perspective says is that our ability to acquire language is biological. It is sometimes linked with certain brain parts or certain brain functions. And what enables us is what they call the innate or inherent mechanisms. And these are the language acquisition device and the language making capacity. Let's talk about the behavioral perspective. And some of the theorists here are Skinner and Bandura. So the behaviorists believe that, for example, Skinner argues that children learn how to speak because they imitate and they are rewarded for whatever language they speak. So as the child is growing up, they begin babbling, then they make holophrases, then they make telegraphic speech. If adults notice that these speeches are closer to or they sound like accurate, or they are accurate, then they reward or they reinforce the child. It can be giving the child something tangible. It can even be a word of mouth, a word of praise. So this reinforcement and for language that is used enable the child to repeat and to learn more. So they say that a behavior that is reinforced is repeated. A behavior that is reinforced is repeated. So children who are reinforced or children who are rewarded for using language grammatically and accurately, they are given the ability to learn language more, and that our ability to learn language is actually not innate or is actually not inherent. Now, language acquisition depends on reinforcement, and this reinforcement can be done through different techniques or different methods. Now, these techniques or methods are called the tact method, the mand method, and the echoic method. The tact method, the mand method, and the echoic method. So let's look at the tact method. So the tact method is a system which helps children to learn new words through response to stimulus objects in their environment. As the child is around playing, there are certain things that are around the child. For example, the child's toys, the child's dresses, the child's parents, the child's sibling, the child's food. With time, because these are things around the child's environment, the child learns to name this common environment because the child constantly makes contact with them. So the child knows that this is a phone because it is in the child's environment. The child knows this is a dog because it's in the child's environment. The child knows this is a cat. The child knows this is milk. The child knows this is food. The child knows this is egg. So this method helps children to verbally name common objects or people because they make contact with these people in their environment. So they can mention their brother's name or anybody who is living on the same compound with them, they can mention the name of the person. And that is the tact method. They're able to learn new words through what response to the objects in the environment. So the mand method. The mand method is because they pick the words because the word is meeting a need. Usually it is used for food and some of the subclasses of food, such as toffee, meat, because these things represent what? Things that satisfy their taste and things that satisfy their hunger. So other conditions such as what? Thirst and fatigue can cause children to learn new words and to say them. So when they are tired, they say they are tired. If they want food, they'll say mommy food. If they want water, mommy I want water. Because these things are meeting a need. So they know the name of ice cream, they know the name of egg, they know the name of chicken, because it is meeting their hunger or their thirst. So they say I want calipo, or I want they even know the different names of what the juices. I want happy delight, or I want a coffee pineapple juice, any of them. Then we have the echoic method. The echoic method is a form of verbal acquisition through imitation. A form of verbal acquisition through imitation. So the child imitates anything the child hears somebody saying, they repeat the same thing. So sometimes they don't even understand what the person is saying or the import of what they have said, but they are just what? Imitating the person. So reinforcement is important because that is what helps the child to what? Repeat the words or use the words that they have acquired often. So when a child speaks appropriate words or uses correct grammar, the parents and adults motivate them. And this motivation is in the form of what? Reinforcement. And the reinforcement motivates them to learn more words and use more words. Let's look at the interactionist theories. Let's look at the interactionist theories. So the interactionists believe that language acquisition is innate. It is biological. Yes, but this biological does not mean that what? It is automatic. They say that it is as a result of both biological disposition and reinforcement. So the biological part is there, but the environment what contributes to it. So in essence, we can actually say that the interactionist theory is actually a combination of the biological and the behaviorists. So they believe that verbal exchanges with parents and others plays a critical role in language development, aside the innate what? Ability to learn language. So they maintain that both innate predisposition or biological factors and a supportive environment in the form of what? Imitation, reinforcement, etc., contribute to language development of a person. Now, two of the prominent interactionists are Piaget and Vygotsky. So, for example, when we take Piaget, Piaget talked about a phenomenon called egocentric speech. In fact, in his research, he observed children of school-going age. Usually, when they close from school, then as they are walking home, they are talking to themselves as they go about their daily activities. Usually, you see it when children are playing. So, okay, put the bag here. No, it's not here. Put it at the other side. Yes, I want that one, the big one. There's nobody around them, but they are just talking to themselves. That is what is called egocentric speech. According to Piaget, once the child is able to do that, they are playing, they are talking to themselves, they are guiding their own activities. It means that they are maturing cognitively and that they are no longer seeing the world through the eyes of others, or they are no longer depending on others to mention things for them. They are learning words by themselves. They can see things by themselves. Later on, this egocentric speech turns to what we call social speech. So they listen to others and they reply and they exchange their ideas through this social speech. Vygotsky, on the other hand, says that language has two purposes. The first purpose is a vehicle through which the adults pass on cultural values and modes of thinking and ways of solving problems to their children. Secondly, he says that what? It is a means of intellectual adaptation, helps the child to what? Develop cognitively. So he also talks about what children's ability to talk to themselves, but he didn't call it what? Egocentric speech. He calls it private speech. He calls it private speech. So Vygotsky, on the other hand, called the conversation that children have with themselves private speech. And he thinks that private speech helps the child to actually plan and regulate their behavior so they are more able to accomplish their goals. So let's say, for example, somebody dashes a child 10 Ghana cedis, then he or she sits down and begin to strategize. So I'll use 2 cedis and I'll buy ice cream. After buying ice cream, they will buy socks. After buying socks, they will buy a book. They will buy eraser. They are planning how they are going to use that 10 cedis that has been given to them. And so they are talking to themselves, but they are planning what? With their own strategies on how to achieve their goals of buying certain things that they want to have. There are sometimes what we call language disorder or language disorders. And these are disorders that are associated with a difficulty or inability of someone to use either spoken language or understand language. So I said that there are certain brain areas that are associated with what? Spoken language. That area is the Broca's area. Another area is associated with understanding language, and that is the Wernicke's area. So damage to these areas cause what we call what? Language disorders. And language disorders are also called or termed as aphasia. Language disorders are also called and known as aphasia. So there are 2 types of aphasia, and they are called Broca's aphasia and Wernicke's aphasia. So by looking at even the function of the Broca's area and the Wernicke's area, you should be able to tell what Broca's aphasia is or what Wernicke's aphasia is. But we'll look at them. Broca's aphasia is also called expressive non-fluent or motor aphasia, and is named after the person who described it first or who discovered it. It was named after Paul Broca, who discovered it in 1861. So Broca's aphasia is caused by damage to the Broca's area, either by a lesion or an infarct. When we say a lesion or an infarct, we are talking about the death of neurons in that area. So a major feature of Broca's aphasia is what? Severe non-fluency of speech. So sometimes the person cannot speak. Sometimes it can be severe that the person is mute. So, or there are sometimes that the person makes what is called stereotype expression. So it's only few statements that the person is able to make, and any other word that the person knows previously is what? Extinct. We have the Wernicke's aphasia, and this type of aphasia is known as the sensory receptive or fluent aphasia. The person can talk. The person's ability to produce language is not affected, but the person's ability to understand, comprehension is a challenge. So I say that the main hallmark of this type of aphasia is that the person has severe comprehension deficit that affects the understanding of both spoken and written language, as well as fluent, grammatically correct, but nonsensical speech. So because the person does not understand what other people say, their own speech in a way is also affected. But it's not affected because they cannot talk. It's affected because what they say or what they speak is what? Nonsensical. Now, because patients are unable to understand what is said, sometimes they are not even able to repeat. If you say something and tell them to repeat, they don't understand the instruction that you are giving them, so they cannot even repeat what you are saying. Let's do speech disorder. So a person has speech disorder when he or she is unable to produce speech sounds correctly. So that is what we call articulation disorder. So here is not the person not being able to use language. It's just how we say that speech is the verbal form of language, and speech has what either is made up of articulation or phonological skills, the voice and the fluency. So speech disorder affects how well a person is able to articulate certain sounds or words in the language, and sometimes it affects what the fluency of the speech. So, for example, speech disorder, somebody will say eat for heat. Somebody will say unbelievable for unbelievable. Somebody will say bellet for belt or sleep for sleep. These are what the examples of some words that people say when they have speech disorders. So speech disorders can affect the fluency with which a person speaks. I think I've said that. Because if you look at the components of a speech, we have the phonological skills, we have the voice, and we have what? The fluency. So speech disorders that affect fluency are stammering and stuttering. So some examples of speech disorders include stuttering, apraxia, and dysarthria. Stuttering, apraxia, and dysarthria. Let's take each one of them and see what happens. In stuttering, in fact, people are interrupted. The flow with which they talk is interrupted. So they are talking, but the speech is more fluent. It doesn't flow like that. So people who stutter can experience the following disruptions or interruptions. There's repetition of sounds. So kwa 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 kwami. They are repeating. Repetition occurs when people involuntarily, and it's not that they are willingly saying it, remember, they are involuntarily repeating sounds, vowels, or words. Then sometimes there are blocks. The person is talking as if something is blocking what the person wants to say. And it happens when they know what they want to say, but they have difficulty in making what the speech sounds. Those who stammer have these. Sometimes it's not because they are repeating, sometimes there's a blockage. They have something to say, but the word is not coming out. So the blocks make the person to feel as if their words are what? They are stuck in their throat and the words cannot come out. Then we also have prolongations where the person stretches or draws a particular sound or word. Kwa 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 kwami. Or the person will say kwami kwami kwami. The kwami 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 is the repetition, and the kwa 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 kwami is what? The prolongation. Now, the symptoms of stuttering can vary depending on the situation. Stress, when the person is stressed, when the person is excited, and when the person is frustrated or angry, can cause stuttering to become more severe. So that's why those who stammer, you see that when they are angry, the stammering becomes what's worse. So some people may find that certain words or sounds can make a person stutter more pronounced. So some people don't stammer on certain words, but it is only when they want to pronounce other words that they begin to stammer. Okay. So stuttering can cause both behavioral and physical symptoms at the same time. So tension in the face and shoulders. So the person is talking and the person is blinking very fast. It is a behavioral or physical symptom as a result of what? The repetition, the blocks, and the prolongation the person is experiencing whilst attempting to speak. So they also have lip tremors, then their lips will just be shaking. They have clenched fists because they are forcing themselves to speak or to let the word come out. Sometimes they clench their fists or they hold their fists. And then they have sudden head movements. Suddenly they are moving their head in a certain way as they are talking. These are the behavioral symptoms. Now, there are two types of stuttering, and these are developmental stuttering. And it affects children who are still learning how to speak or use language skills. And here, genetic factors are involved. They increase the person's likelihood of developing this type of stutter. But we have neurogenic stuttering, and this is caused by what? Brain damage, where damage to certain parts of the brain prevents the person from properly coordinating the different regions of the brain that plays a role in speech. Let's look at apraxia. Apraxia is a general term that refers to a brain damage that impairs motor skills, and it can affect body. So a damage of your brain that affects motor skills. And motor skills can include what? The movement of your mouth. So we have verbal apraxia or apraxia of speech, where there's impairment of motor skills that affects the mouth or any other organ associated with what? The production of speech. So they know the words they want to say, but the words don't come out. They know the words correctly, but what? The words don't come out. Or even the movement of their mouth will not enable them to say the word correctly. That is what we refer to as apraxia of speech. Finally, we want to look at dysarthria. Dysarthria. So dysarthria occurs when damage to the brain causes the muscles to be weak. So maybe the facial muscles are weak, the lips are weak, the tongues are weak, the throat and the chest muscles are weak. So weakness in these parts of the body will make the person what? Speak with what? Difficulty. So people who have dysarthria may experience the following: slurred speech, they are mumbling, they are speaking too slowly or too quickly, they are speaking too softly or quietly, and they have difficulty moving with their mouth or tongue because the muscles are weak, and so the intensity with which they are supposed to move these muscles to produce speech, it doesn't come that way. What factors affect language development? I have listed quite a number of them. Maturation. You need to mature to a certain point to be able to use language. So at 6 months, you cannot talk, you can only what? Babble. Family income. I put family income here because sometimes there are certain strategies that help people to acquire language, like buying books for the child to read. If the family does not have income, the first thing they are thinking about is how to get food and eat. They don't know how to buy books for the child to read. So you see that poverty too can affect what? Language development, because as a child reads more, the child gets more vocabulary. Sex. Females have been shown to use more language compared to what? Males. And the reason being that we have certain brain areas that are dominant for females than for males. Then school experience. What environment is created in the school? Do they just go and dance and go home, or they are encouraged to read, or they are exposed to words? What activities do the teachers engage in at school to enable the child to read? Physical factors or diseases. If you have weak muscles, if you have damage to the brain, any of these things, it can affect how well you develop language. Your level of intelligence, yes, it also affects language. And then your central nervous system. Your central nervous system is made up of the brain and the spinal cord. And so it's in a way linked to what? Diseases. If their brain is affected by any disease, then language use, your ability to express yourself using language or to understand language is impaired. Even your motor system. So we said dysarthria, apraxia of speech, where your ability to move your muscles that you use or the body parts that you use for language or for speaking are impaired. So if your motor system is impaired, your speech will also be impaired, or your language can be impaired. In fact, social and affective growth. How well do you interact? Those who are able to interact more, children who are able to interact and play more with other children, are able to learn language very well, because they pick some words not only from their surrounding, but as in the context of they are playing with their friends, they are picking more words. And a responsive environment, an environment that pushes what? The child to engage more. and to learn more words. What are some of the things that interfere with communication or speech or language development? Hearing loss. If you are deaf and dumb, it will interfere. If you have language disorders, it can interfere. If you have visual disabilities and there are no, how do I call it? There are no mechanisms to compensate for that visual disability, then it means you are going to have challenges. If you have cognitive impairment disabilities, you are likely to have challenges with language use, emotional problems. Those who have autism, they have problem with language. Those who don't interact, their parents just sit them in their room, they watch telly, they play with their iPad. They don't play with friends, they don't interact. I said that was social and affective interaction helps children to learn language. So if you lack that interaction, then you will not be able to acquire language. Structure abnormalities. So structure abnormalities can do with what? Brain damage. It can be facial structure abnormalities. Those who have cleft and palate and all those things. If you have motor problems, if you have voice disorders, if you have disfluency disorders, so like you have stuttering or stammering, it can affect what? Your language acquisition. So what are the educational implications as teachers or as would-be teachers? What does all this knowledge imply for us? First of all, we should engage in oral activities, including storytelling, telling children to describe pictures, active play. It helps children to gain a lot of vocabulary, and at the same time, it offers them the opportunity to practice and use the language they have already acquired. The child has learned how to read, but is in the room. The words that he has learned, who is he going to practice with? Allow the child to play. Teachers should create what and make use of language games. Games that involves the use of words or the ability to use language. These are games that help the child to recognize sounds, phrases, sentences that have been learned. So it's not always that you come and say the plural of egg is eggs. No, use it to play a game, play-based learning. Use it in a way that the child will have fun as at the same time that he or she is learning. And so it will stimulate what? The ability to verbalize language and to make speech. Teachers should be what? Good speech models for children to emulate or imitate. I said under the behaviorist theory that children imitate what you say. So whatever you want the child to be learning, if they are good words, it even comes to those who use what? Bad words like profane words. If you are saying it and the child is listening to it, the child picks it. So be a good speech model for the child to copy. The teaching of vocabulary or words in English or any other language should be followed by what? Using this vocabulary to form sentences. So you don't teach them vocabulary in vacuum. You teach them to use it to form. So if they are reading, you pick certain words that you think might be new to them. You let them repeat the words. After a period of time, after repeating, you let them use the words. You explain even the meaning of the words to them and let them use the words what? To form a sentence. Then you can go on with your reading. Some people just give the book to the child, then you say read. No. The child reads, the child knows how the word. But sometimes they are not even able to pronounce it properly, even to be able to name what? The meaning of the word. Regular reading is important for language development. Buy them books. Let them read. Let them read. Reading is important. It opens up even their cognitive functioning. So it's important that childhood education providers implement the National Policy on Education, where they provide that the language of instruction should be the mother tongue. First of all, I think I said that even in our previous lecture. It should be the mother tongue and it should be taught as what? A subject. Research shows that once they master the mother tongue very well, learning after that, learning a second language, even before puberty, should be easy for them. So on this note, we bring our lecture to an end, and thanks for paying attention. Thanks for listening.